way. But I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. But I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay.
Hi, this is Dan Fox with Boulder Psychological Services. I'm happy to be here with our team to talk about family communication from chaos to calmness. We've got with us today Kimberly Bryant. She is a licensed professional counselor practicing in Boulder and Netherlands. Kimberly is a family therapist and a therapeutic education consultant, helping families find and secure treatment supports when needed. Kimberly's specialties are in attachment and trauma resolution. We've also got PHILLIP Horner. PHILLIP is a licensed clinical social worker, certified group psychotherapist, and the director of Whole Connection. He has worked with families for the last 10 years as a therapist, helping them reconnect and work through troubled moments while supporting their understanding of each other. This focus has helped PHILLIP create healthier communication and boundaries with families. And finally, we have Karen EIFFERT. She is a licensed clinical social worker and equine therapist. She just recently moved her practice from Boulder to Longmont. Karen works with teens and adults and specializes in working with trauma. I'm very excited to have this team together because we are going to dig into family communication and try to understand how to move from chaos to calmness. This is always an interesting topic, and in this day and age with screens sometimes providing a barrier to communication, with the introduction of vaping into our adolescence world, there's a lot going on. So I want to dig into this. And the first question I have for everybody is about the idea of chaos. And is chaos a normal, healthy part of family communication? Is it something we should work to minimize, or is it functionally useful?
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Yeah. I see chaos as what happens when everybody's feeling disconnected and everybody's out of alignment with each other. So to kind of hit the second question first, is it something we should work to minimize? I would say, sure, yes, let's minimize chaos. But when it is arising, it's really valuable information for us as a family, because it means we need to do something different. We really have an opportunity to slow down and find each other again and connect to each other and come back to connection and attunement and communication in a new way.
Yeah, I would just build off that and say this is also a pretty normal thing for most families to have. It's going to be natural for them to have some chaos, and it's actually a great time to practice some of those techniques that later some of these questions are going to ask us. So that we can actually not just reconnect, but more importantly, dive deeper with each other. And I think it is an opportunity for that. So I think it's pretty natural and sometimes useful to have a little bit of that within a family unit.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a certain amount of chaos no matter what you do in the context of a family. And I think one of the things to really pay attention to is what's chaos and what's busyness. Can you be busy and still stay connected with each other? And how does the chaos impact individual family members? Do you have kids that can tolerate a certain degree of chaos and stay grounded and do okay? Or do you have a child who gets really off base when there's too much chaos? And in that case, how can you help that child learn to set boundaries? How can you demonstrate boundaries yourself and self-care so that they learn how to deal with our chaotic world in a way that doesn't send them to off course.
So I hear you all talking about things like connection or going deeper or attunement, and I think about my own family. I have 4 children, and sometimes they don't want that connection. So I'm wondering, why is it important for us to be trying to foster this communication? And what are those things that are really important for families to be connecting about?
I think some of it is about our culture as a family. You know, if we are a family that talks about everything, whatever it is, and that's just how we operate, then we're going to have a family that is able to address things as they come up, and know how to work with each other when we don't want to communicate. There's going to be a lot more understanding of the give and take of the different players in the family if it's something we do as a family, is talk and communicate about things. I think in terms of what's important for families to talk about, I feel everything, with lots of exclamation marks. And I think that, again, that, especially as our kids get older and they pull away and go into their own social lives more and more, if the foundation of our family system is that we talk about stuff, then kids are going to fall back to that when they need that. Mm-hmm. And it just makes the hard stuff easier when it comes up.
I agree. I think it depends on the culture of the family, because some families might talk a lot less, and that can be still healthy dynamic. People can still grow up to be great people, and although I think there are certain things that are really important for families to be talking about, I think it would be a miss if they weren't giving space. And I think later on we're probably going to talk about divorce a little bit. That's a really important topic for families to discuss, for children to hear and listen. And going backwards a little bit, I was thinking about the chaos aspect, and I think it's the normalcy of it is also thinking about the pivotal changes and transitions that we go through in our families, particularly around children and their development. You think about when they're going through their teen years. This is normal for there to be a little more, and how do we reconnect in those moments is a lot different depending on that family culture.
Yeah, I think there's such a normalcy in kids pushing back at their parents and kind of acting as if they don't really want connection. But most kids, most human beings really want to be seen and valued and understood. And so I think that's kind of the tricky part as a parent, in how to keep your child feeling like you are there and connected to them, even as they go through that process of trying to gain more independence and kind of a general pushing away. And I think that kind of always remembering what you love and appreciate about that kid, always remembering to start off on a good note with them when you see them, when they walk in the room, remembering that you just can't always be about all of the tasks, the schoolwork and the chores, but that connection and being able to just enjoy each other's time together is a really important piece of that, which is easy to let go of that in chaos when you're just trying to get things done.
Boy, I would love to dig further into that, because what you all are talking about with positive culture, right, personal family culture, I think it makes such a difference. But that piece you were mentioning, Karen, around how kids often just sort of have this pushback, especially in adolescence, there's this resistance, I think that kind of makes us as parents sort of freeze up. So I love your idea of, like, when you see them, greet them, right? Like, actually, like, try to connect first before the homework or things like that. And I'm wondering if we have other ideas about what to do if we feel like the communication's off, the family culture is off. What are some specific steps that we can take to start improving that?
I think you're always going to get more positive progress with kids when they have a reset and they're back at a place of feeling connected and belonging. If you get into a cycle with a lot of power struggling and a lot of, kind of banging up against each other, you're going to get a lot more resistance from them. And I think with any of us as human beings, when our defenses are down, when we're calm, a lot of times we have a lot more ability to think things through differently and do things differently. And so I think it's easy to get into a pattern of really needing to get things done and pushing. And in reality, often it's more effective to step back, connect, and then often we can start out at a different place there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that power struggle piece is really interesting to think about, because a lot of times those fights and everything go way beyond what it really was about.
Yeah.
We're skipping past actually what the discussion was. We're skipping past what was frustrating. And it might be something much more primal in a lot of ways. Maybe it's the desire to actually be seen, to be cared for, to be loved, simply. And I think that gets missed a lot of times as we're getting into these smaller arguments that then compile onto each other and make it really difficult to have any chance to get out of this chaos or create calmness. Mm-hmm. Which I think, thinking about the idea of how to create calmness, I know we're all going to have different great ideas for this, but I can't stress enough actually the ability to offer and create space for each other. particularly in the middle of when things get really chaotic. And you see this in families, I think, when it hits a heated moment and things start being said that maybe shouldn't have been said or get a little out of control. Those are perfect moments when you need to be able to take space and come back. It could be 15 minutes later. It could be real quick.
I think to wrap this back into what you asked specifically around kind of as kids start to move into adolescence and pull away, I think it's such a pinnacle time developmentally for parents to get support, because all of a sudden as parents we can find ourselves super triggered and super confused and feeling rejected and not knowing where did my child go, and it can feel really super overwhelming as our kids are starting their journey of individuation and moving in their own way, and this is where I keep coming back to, like, got to keep engaging, got to keep communicating, greeting them with positive regard, finding opportunities when they offer something to us, whether it's a song or something about a friend of theirs, or being willing to jump right in and be like available to listen and connect to whatever's important to them, oftentimes becomes the way that we have a relationship with our kids as they're entering into their adolescence. And so it's a valuable thing to be making sure you're getting support as a parent and getting support in your community around how do we do relationship with our kids as they're getting older. And I'm going to just keep coming back to don't stop communicating with them, to keep showing up.
Yeah, I so agree, Kimberly, and I think that a huge piece of that is also that if we're continuing giving that space over and over, they know we're there.
Yep.
They always know that we'll be present, that we'll be there, and that's creating that secure attachment that we're thinking of. That's creating that space for them to always talk. That also says that we have regulated systems, so, and knowing that, that means we have to be taking care of ourselves to be able to be there for our children. Yeah. If we're not, then this is going to be a very chaotic place.
I think it's also super helpful for kids to see their parents role modeling how they handle their own frustrations, how they handle their own feelings of being overwhelmed, to be able to say, like, wow, I got really frustrated this morning with what happened, and I don't like what I said to you. I want to back that up. To be able to keep kind of coming back in with real helpful information for them to see how adults can get themselves in over their head a little bit and then back it back out and do the repair work. And I think helping kids to see how to go about doing that, and also to normalize that as human beings we get overwhelmed, we get frustrated, sometimes we yell, sometimes we're cranky, but there is a way of backing back out of that instead of creating a really negative cycle of behavior.
I'm curious if we want to dig into the brain a little bit more and like mechanism for getting triggered and how that affects our interpersonal neurobiology. Does anybody feel like, oh, this is a hot topic I want to
I feel
talk
like
on?
you do such a good job of describing that.
All right, here's my 2 cents on one of the challenges I think with our nervous system is that once our amygdala, which is that like alarm bell, right? Once that gets fired, there's not a lot of good thinking, right? Our sort of, let's get attuned, let's connect, that part of our brain that can actually figure out how to do that is offline. And that piece about taking space, Philip, I think is so important because it's really one of the few options we have, I think, in those moments to help ourselves settle down. And the second piece is that we've found by watching parents' brains and their children's brains in real time, we can see how if one person is feeling triggered or sad or a number of different emotions, that those same emotions are being experienced in the other person's brain. The more connected we are in our relationship, the more that kind of neuronal firing is happening. We're just picking up on all these little cues, and it just happens as a reflection of the other person's emotional experience. So, if you find yourself in a power struggle, we're going to be feeling escalated because our kid's feeling escalated. And they're going to then pick up on our escalation, and that domino effect, or the ever-escalating effect that we feel, is neurological, right? That's our body in our mind doing something that's supposed to be somehow helpful in the survival and protection of our children, but in the moment we're a little glitched out because we aren't actually centered. So this all comes back to how do we do our own self-care in an environment that is not particularly rooted in great strategies for, hey, be calm, have children, make your way in the outside world. It's a tricky ask for parents, but it's important to try to find that in a regular way.
Yeah, I think you're taking it in the direction of, how can parents get themselves calmed down? Oftentimes, I think that we as parents really need to have other adults that we can lean into in those moments, right? Because when our kids are dysregulated, they really need us to be able to come and help them calm down so that they can get their good thinking back online. But when I, as mom, am totally spun out and overwhelmed, I might need to call Karen, and even just sometimes leaving the voicemail on her voicemail, just like, it might be enough for me just to know I'm feeling heard. I can start the process of calming myself down. And so how do we as the adults really resource ourselves and take responsibility for learning how to help ourselves relax and calm down so that we can get out of those spirals? I think that's the harder piece.
Yeah.
Because we're not able to think well. So how do we keep learning how to do that?
Well, and I think what you guys both just brought up around how poorly our brains function and our ability to communicate and kind of say the right things at those times when we're really upset or dysregulated. And I think that's a helpful thing to start, helpful languaging for kids to start understanding. When we're super upset, when we're in our fight or flight mode, we're not thinking very well, we're not communicating well, and it always serves us to take a break and to get ourselves calmed back down and regulated before we communicate. I think that allows space within a family to be able to do that. The other thing, Dan, that you mentioned earlier that I thought might be good to just kind of go back to is the concept of attunement. We therapists talk about that a lot, but it's something I don't know how much is talked about kind of in the rest of the world. And attunement is that ability to, feel somebody else that you're in the room with and really notice what's going on with them and being aware of, facial expressions and body language, and does that person look sad? Does that person look hungry or whatever? And to be able to check in, you think of what it's like to sit in a room full of people and feel really sad and how alienating it is if no one notices that you're sad or you're angry. And so for kids, if parents and adults around them can really be tapped into that stuff, it helps them to feel safer, helps them to relate more effectively and feel really heard and seen and felt. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I have a question about spring break, because this is coming up, and spring break has sort of got potential and the possibility for problems. I know that's at least true in my family. But here we have this time where we're often spending an intense amount of time with our family, and it's not structured the way the rest of the semester typically goes in terms of how often we're seeing each other and what we have to do during the day. So both with my own family and families that I see in my office, there's often this explosive moments or just kind of tension around the breaks, and sometimes they're great, but sometimes they do have the pitfalls. Mm-hmm. Spring break's coming in 2 weeks. Do you guys have suggestions for us?
I love it. I love the question. Mm. And I think that I get excited in my work with families to look for every opportunity we can sit down and make a plan and set things up and work together. And so, this is an opportunity. Can you guys sit down Friday night, right before spring break, and say, let's have a council, let's have a powwow, let's talk about what's going to be structured time and unstructured time and friend time and family time, and what do you think, to your child, involve them, include them, and everybody kind of put their thoughts on the table. You might not come up with some grand plan of how it all needs to go, but at least everybody's kind of thinking well and voicing their concerns and their excitements, and sometimes that can be enough to mitigate a lot of challenges. sometimes that opens the door to someone saying, yeah, well, I feel like you're not going to let me get to do X, Y, and Z. And you know that that's something that needs some negotiation and discussion. So communicate. Talk about it. Plan for it. Set it up well, because you can.
Nice.
You already said what I was really going to say, which is inclusion. I think it's so important for the kids to be part of the conversation. Otherwise, they just get told what is, and there'll immediately then be a lot of times resistance to that. And then you've got your family fight going on before spring break, and then you've got punishments happening, and we've gone down a spiral of what was this really about again? And then to all of them, this was about trying to get ready for what can happen during spring break. And I think you start that conversation now.
Yeah.
There's no reason to start it that last week. Start it as soon as you can. Get prepared for it. And it might not be just one sit-down meeting. It could be a sit-down of questions of what they want, like you were saying, what they're looking forward to, but also things to come back and talk more about.
Nice.
So let's go in the other direction of something where I think there might be a lot more pitfalls and it's harder to find the potential, which would be when a family is coping with divorce. And how do we have calm communication in spite of some of the changes that divorce is bringing, and at a time when typically we're not really getting along with our ex, so that kind of communication can be volatile.
Yeah, this is a tricky question. I think that you're trying to work with the chaotic dynamic that is going to be just natural due to a divorce situation, and then you're trying to create co-parenting while they're on fire. And so how do you deal with a couple who is no longer a couple, now trying to take care of children at the same time they can't take care of themselves? I think the number one thing here is actually for the parents individually to be talking to both children on the same page of what they're going to say. Now, how do you get to that same page is the big question. I think looking for support, I really think earlier, Kimberly, you were talking about calling, like you would call Karen, just put something on the phone. I think it's so important to have a group of people you're talking to, that you're engaging with around this difficulty, and having them almost screen what you're going to say before you talk to your ex or you talk to your children about it, because you are in a heightened state that whole time, most likely. Going through a divorce, and most people have gone through breakups, but imagine a divorce. You're in a real heightened state, and you're saying the amygdala's going crazy. Yeah. So have people there that help regulate it. You're not going to be able to do this part alone. And so if you can find support, I encourage that.
Yeah, I think encouraging communication, encouraging your kids to be able to communicate about their feelings about what's going on, and whether they're able to do that with you or your spouse, or whether they need to have outside adults, whether they're professional folks or whether they're aunts and uncles or family friends, that they can speak honestly about what's happening with them, and really putting an emphasis on knowing that you have to give them some information. I think sometimes I see families that have tried so hard to leave the kids out of the details of the divorce that the kids don't even know what happened. And I think there's a degree of information that kids need to have. They need to be heard, and recognizing that parents may not be in a great place to do the hearing, and so kind of getting whatever help is needed for the kids around that, and to really be aware of the difference between helping kids to understand what's going on and not kind of trashing out the opposite parent. That's never going to be helpful to the kids to have their parent defamed around them.
I think the thing that really stands out here for me in working with families, oftentimes families will come into therapy saying, we're going to be moving toward divorce, we want support, how do we do this? And going through the process, what I continue to find is when everybody has safe place and people to talk to about what's going on, things actually are okay. And I think the challenge for that is that it's actually counterintuitive to everything else in our culture and everything else that's going on. Divorce creates a lot of big feelings. And so how do we make room for big feelings when we're all actively working on trying to kind of manage and mitigate and put the big feelings away?
Yeah.
This is actually a time when we need to really make a lot of space. Because if we can, and we do, we probably won't have a lot of the outcomes that come from poor divorcing and how that hurts kids over time.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add at the end is, because I focus so much on the parents, which really important to find a level of communication you both can have, if not seeking out a professional to do that, or just remembering basic things like I statements. Remembering, because you're both in moments that can be easily triggered in that. But thinking about the kids, I think it's so important not to forget them. We talked about earlier about continuing engaging, and that is so important. Not pressing, but just creating more space over and over and over and over. And individually, not just to one kid. Sometimes one parent is closer to one child than the other. It's important then to go across and really giving more space to both children.
We've got time for 2 more questions, and one of the ones that strikes me as significant is the dynamic that I've seen a lot with families where the parents are doing fine, the parent-child relationship is fine, but the siblings are at each other's throats, and it becomes either verbally or physically abusive and very hard for the parents to find some way to actually have a meaningful boundary. Suggestions?
Yeah, I love this question a lot because it comes up and it's difficult. It's not as clean cut as, oh, mom and dad, you just need to model communication differently, because it's layered and there's so much going on with sibling relationships. What I find can be really effective and helpful, however, is if we as parents can get out of the narrative and the content and the story about what's happening with our kids. Obviously, we need to keep a global perspective and try to seek to understand the dynamic that they're in together. But in working with them, if we can sit down and really be a neutral party to help facilitate them learning how to listen to each other and hear each other, oftentimes that's really all it takes for everything to shift up. There might be old things and old hurts and old trauma. There probably are. They're siblings. These things have been building for years. But oftentimes in helping 2 people that are in conflict learn how to sit down, listen to each other, hear each other, and feel really known and heard by each other, it can shift. It can really shift what's going on in a family system when the kids feel like they get to have that with each other, and that they've got adults that are backing it and not taking sides and getting caught in it with them.
And what an amazing experience, too, for 2 children then to sit down in conflict with each other and have people holding that space and then be able to become more comfortable with that. I mean, we could all understand how useful that could probably be in our lives as we grow older. I think about how much the parents need to be on a team when this happens, because if the parents start splitting, you're just creating more conflict happening. So if one starts agreeing or disagreeing with each other, it means that those parents need to have their own little team meetings to make sure that they're on the same page with whatever they're bringing up. The things I think about the children, though, is also what's happening outside the family that's coming in. Is it actually about each other, or is this something else going on that's being brought in? It's always a good thing to check in on.
Well, I think, too, about how easy it is to get really super frustrated with the kid who you may perceive as being the aggressor, and it's really hard to stay as connected, I think, sometimes to that child when you're feeling really frustrated. And there's a saying that negative attention is better than no attention at all, and there's some kids who will seek out that negative attention to get interaction from their parents. And so being really aware of, am I getting so caught up in my frustration with this kid that I'm forgetting to spend time with a part of them that I really appreciate, and remembering to tap back in with that, and remembering that that both kids need similar levels of affection, even if one's being a total pain in the rear.
So, final question. This one I think is a really important one for our families that are struggling quite a bit. What resources are there in the community that you would suggest for families that are going through this kind of struggle?
When I saw that question, I was thinking about more like reading resources, and a couple of resources that I really like. There's a book called The Available Parent by John Duffy that I really like how they describe parenting. And then also if you're in a family where communication is really seriously broken down and tends to get kind of aggressive and angry, there's a book called Nonviolent Communication. I wrote what is his name? I'm trying to think of his name.
Marshall Rosenberg.
Yes.
I was thinking of him
Marshall
earlier.
Rosenberg. That's a great book to kind of help set ground rules for communication. It's one place to start.
Nice.
I love Parenting from the Inside Out by Dan Siegel. Parents with Adolescents, anything that Michael Bradley has written will only be of benefit to you to read. You know, sometimes things have escalated to the point where bringing in third-party professional support to hold space with your family can be a life changer, you know, and we all know this, getting to be in that seat of holding families. We get to watch how much shift can happen in doing family work with therapy. But for some families, you know, depending on what your community really provides you, you know, friends and extended family members and people who are really trusted, who can come in and hold and facilitate. I think, again, coming back to how do you communicate? How do we sit down and name, wow, we're having a hard time as a family. We need to figure some new stuff out. Me, Mom, I'm not communicating the way I want to. Me, Dad, I've been raising my voice a lot. You know, we need to figure out how to do this different, kids. What do you think? You know, and so working together and oftentimes having somebody else who can really hold that so that things don't escalate, or if they do, that things slow down, and can be really useful and helpful.
Yeah. The last thing I'd put out there is just find a support group. Find other parents that you can connect with and that you're not alone in this with. And if you can't find one, then make one, and make it semi-formal. Make it that we're here to talk about the difficulty of being parents and how hard that is and the struggle with it and the constant feeling of failure within it. And that could be something just having dinner together, but I think there's something important that you're coming together to really talk about that difficulty. So if you can't find one, I'd encourage creating one.
One last thing that I would love to bring in that we haven't talked about today, which has a big impact on family communication in this day and age, is technology, and how we tend to focus on how much we're concerned about the kids overusing technology, but in reality, most of we adults struggle with that as well. And for any of us, when we are really connected to our devices and not paying attention to those around us, those relationships suffer. And so really role modeling healthy boundaries with putting your technology away, with not looking at your technology constantly when you're with your kids, and really asking that the kids do the same. I think that's one huge thing we can do in this day and age to help with communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks. Boy, I would really love to just express my gratitude to our panelists for being here today, and also to our sponsors, the Boulder Valley School District, who is not only a sponsor but has provided this space for us, the Boulder Public Library, the Parent Engagement Network, Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Public Library, Centennial Peaks Hospital, the Louisville Public Library, the Hope Coalition, the Healthy Youth Alliance, Expand Mentoring, and the Daily Camera. We hope that this has been helpful and informative, and please join us for our other workshops this semester. They are available on Boulder Psychological Services on a flyer, and our clinicians are on that website as well. Take care.
Hey, I'm making my own way, but I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. When I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? And wait a while, winter time.